There's so many cases that you've done, and they're all fascinating. I would like to talk about a couple of the others, though, that you have raised in your memoir. And I was interested in this particular one, that in 1966 you were briefed by a New South Wales company which had been sued in Victoria under the Sale of Goods Act for delivering a defective pie-making machine.
Yeah. The Victorian company was Herbert Adams, a very major pie maker, and this pie-making machine was our most elaborate thing. They're very, very common now, in which fundamentally it was a conveyor belt which had holes for the base of the pies, into which the filling for the pie would be plopped, and then the top of the pie would be put on and pressed down, and then the conveyor would go through the oven, just like these toasters that you have when you're having breakfast in a resort. But it had its problems, yes.
And I was wondering, you were asked to recommend a silk to lead you, but for some reason it says here, neither the client nor the solicitor trusted the Victorian bar. Why?
I don't know. I think they just weren't used to them. The Victorian bar was somewhat different from ours. The clerking system worked quite differently. I didn't mean to be being offensive.
No, I was just curious.
To my Victorian friends. You can certainly understand that the solicitor wouldn't have had the faintest idea about it, who to use in Victoria.
But you also had the interesting situation, I believe, at there was a time when you actually had to move your own father's admission.
Can I tell that story yet?
Yes.
Well, the New South Wales firm I'd done a lot of work for, so I was picked as the junior fairly early in the case, and I was asked to recommend a leader. And Lester Mears led me many times and was a great. He became a president of the Bar Association. Was a very, very good silk. So I recommended Lester. And we went down to Victoria, and we had a view together of the pie-making machine trying to work. Lester and I were both admitted to the Victorian bar, and we both signed the roll as barristers and not as solicitors. Then the case went sort of dawdling on, and Lester was appointed to the Supreme Court. So the solicitor said, well, who can we get now? And I said, Jack Lee. And Jack Lee also had led me on many occasions and was a very good silk. So I recommended Jack. And he also became a Supreme Court judge before the case was on. And so the solicitor said, well, who are we going to get now? And I said, well, look, I think what you've got to do, and with our track record, you better get someone who's over 72 and who can't be appointed to the Supreme Court. And he said, well, where am I going to find a silk like that? And I said, well, what about my father? So Dad got the brief to lead me, and down we went together to Victoria for him to be admitted. And I moved his admission. Now, I must correct that slightly and say I did have a leader. Sir James Tate led me, but Victoria does much more officially than we do, because I had a formal brief to move the admission of my father as junior to Sir James Tate. And I suspect that is probably pretty unique, at least in Australia, that a son has moved his father's admission to the bar. Of course, and the other part of it, of course, was to the Chief Justice, in his little speech to the new admittees, had to vary it somewhat, because he couldn't very, very well give a lecture to a silk of the age and experience of my father, who was a friend of his anyway, that he gave to the youngsters just being admitted for the first time.
Your father could hardly be described as wet behind the ears.
Exactly.